Okay, good evening. This will be the ninth part of Hadrocho ve'etzes al Chassidic. So what I've done, as you probably noticed, trying to structure it by subjects. So we began maybe with the thing that is Karev Yeser, which is Shalom Bayis. Then I moved to some other subjects, but the last few weeks I've been dealing with communications. Now, it may not be as exciting as Shalom Bayis and dramatic, but I intend to go back to it. But I felt my goal here, as I said every week, that is to give as much as I can from my experience and from my knowledge that I learned from the approach and the methodology of the Rebbe to help you in whatever shlichus you're going to be doing in your life. And I find one of the most important things is obviously communications. Communications with your spouse, but also communications with Mitzvah Hashem, your children, communications with your community, with strangers, with Chassidim, with non-Chassidim, with people who have very different opinions and different approaches. We were talking about controversial matters, started with Mashiach, we went over to gender issues, and last week I discussed the Chav Dalet Tevis Sich of Memtes. So what I want to do, this is my plan at least, is to cover today a little more about that, and then next week I'll send you a PDF of a collection of answers I personally received from the Rebbe. Many of them have not been seen by anybody before. I mean, I did it once for Shluchim. Basically 10 lessons of communication that I learned from the Rebbe. In actually Tzetlach, notes of the Rebbe that the Rebbe wrote. Most of them are to me as I worked in Hanochas and Sichas. And with that, I'll probably next week conclude this section, and then we'll move to other subjects. Some of them you guys wrote to me, things you want me to talk about. Some I wanted to talk about anyway. So my goal is after this, let's call it semester, you'll have a good, the variety covering many different areas of life, both on the personal and on the professional. And at the end of the day, your Futsa Chutza is about communication, how to communicate, not just what to say, but how to say it. So what I wanted to do today is address the following. A question I've been asked many times by our meisdes, our boys' schools, our girls' schools. What fundamentally is different about the derech hachinuch, the way we teach our children and our students, than, let's say, another non-Chabad meisdes, Chassidish, not Chassidish? What's fundamentally different? It's the same Torah shebiksav, the same Torah shebal peh, same halachas. So what's fundamentally different? Besides the fact, yes, there's Chassidish Chabad, but that's literature, that's text, that's Torah. But what is there a different method? Is there something else that we add when we want to communicate to our students? I think it's vital to know this because even shluchim, who I speak with and deal with a lot, many of them say, what am I teaching that's different? What am I doing that's different than, let's say, another kiruv organization or another educator? What's fundamentally different? So, we usually have the platitudes like, we have Avos Yisrael as a yesod, there's no judgmentalism, everyone's welcome. But is it just that? Or is there more in the actual method of teaching? So I challenge you to think about it. I'm going to talk about this, but I want to begin with a story that actually happened with me, my Serav, that I think lays the groundwork of what we're going to talk about. This happened maybe 15 years ago. It was in Long Island. Where was it, Long Island? Touro College has a law school in, where is it? One second. Excuse me. It'll come to me. It's one of the towns in Long Island. For some reason, I'm running a blank. Huh? Melville? No. Huntington, Long Island, is where Torah has I was invited to be on a panel with two other individuals. They were called rabbis. I insisted not to be called rabbi, as you'll see from the story why. And one was a Orthodox rabbi, and one was a conservative rabbi. So the discussion was the principles of Jewish faith. Really, it was about Mashiach, to be honest. As a matter of fact, when I was invited, I didn't know there'd be a panel. And I knew that panels in general, though they have their merit, but they also create confusion sometimes, because when you're on a panel with other so-called authorities, and there's a big audience, what do you do when you disagree with another person? You don't want, on one hand, start getting into a debate. The Rebbe is very against debates, because debates just create confusion by especially the listeners who may not know much. On the other hand, you don't want to come across that you agree. So it's complicated when it comes to a panel. So after the fact, I was already scheduled and planned and advertised. So what could you do? I remember I told the host, I said, it would have been nice if you told me before. Anyway, so I made a suggestion that to keep things in order, that we should have the moderator should have 10 predetermined questions that all three panelists, myself and the other two, would see beforehand. So at least that would keep some control. It's not just everybody, questions that all of us answer. And then afterwards, we would take questions from the audience. Now, it was such a very popular event. You had over 600-700 people showed up. 600-700 people showed up in this big auditorium. And then the moderator asked the questions, and it went quite well, actually. Everybody was very cordial, and it was agreed upon a lot of points. Why, for example, is Mashiach a foundation in Judaism? Things like that. Then came the turn of the audience to ask questions from the crowd. So here was the question that I'm going to address. This was, you have in your life, they call definitive moments that you never forget. They can shape your entire future. This was one of those type of nights, which I didn't expect, because I'd been around. I've been to many lectures and many lecture tours and questions and answers. So I've been asked a lot of questions. I pretty much have never been surprised, not surprised by questions, because I've heard almost everything. But here's what happened here. A woman gets up. She's almost to the back of the auditorium in the bleacher. And she says the following: my question is to all three of you, panelists. You all just spoke for the last hour, your thoughts and ideas on why Mashiach, Messiah, is such a fundamental principle in Jewish thinking and Jewish life, the purpose of creation. But I want to ask this question. I speak on behalf, this was the way she put it, I speak on behalf of the largest group of Jews today. They're called the unaffiliated. The largest number of Jews are unaffiliated. They don't necessarily go to synagogue. They struggle with what it means to be a Jew. They're secular, and I'm one of them. She says, I speak on behalf of all of them. According to you, if Mashiach comes tonight, what will happen with this 80% of assimilated Jews? That was her question. And I remember thinking, that's a good question. That's an excellent question. I never heard it before, asked by anybody. And thank God, I was third in turn to answer. So the first two would have the first shots. And the Orthodox rabbi, we were on a podium, and his response was 4 words. God will have mercy. That's what he said. God will have mercy. Now, I don't know if you know what it feels like or sounds like when an auditorium of around 600 people boo somebody. They booed him. Boo. But one boo is bad enough, but you have 600 people doing so, it's a very certain harmony, very humiliating and very insulting. So the whole place booed him. Like boo, like everybody, almost everybody. And I felt bad for him. But on the other hand, he deserved it, because his response was first of all, he didn't answer the question. And his response was somewhat condescending, basically saying that the assimilated Jews deserve the worst, and God will have Rachmanus, will have mercy. That was essentially what he was saying. Okay, comes the next rabbi, the conservative rabbi. He turns to me and he says, I have that very question myself, Rabbi Jacobson. What will happen with that? So he just added and said he himself has the question. And then he added oil to the fire. With his voice dripping with cynicism, he said the following. I'm not going to repeat the name of the individual he quoted, but the way he said it was, I heard, as I said, it was cynical almost. I heard the name of one of the tzaddikim of the previous generation who said that the Holocaust took place because the Jews were assimilated and they transgressed God's Torah. And that's why they were being punished for their sins. And then that wasn't enough. He began to describe in detail. It was so shocking. The whole place was like mortified. In detail, that every midah keneged midah, tit for tat, for every sin the Jews did, this is what the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, perpetrated.
All according to this rabbi?
Yeah. Yeah. The women didn't cover their hair, so their heads were shaven. Jews didn't put on tefillin. Children were born. I don't want to go into the graphic details because it's not something to repeat. But the worst imagination you could imagine. The whole place, you could feel the vibe in the room became, you feel when people are very upset. And this is what he says. So then he turned to me again. He says, so is this going to happen to the assimilated, unaffiliated Jews when Mashiach comes? No, there's another Holocaust. So you can imagine now the scene is set. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. Everybody was sitting there. He turned it into a very hostile now question, very challenging. And here I am. I had no idea what I was going to say. It was all on the spot, all live. I had to come up with something. And I couldn't come up with a cute answer. And I really felt, I feel this way many times, but here more than ever, I felt a real responsibility because these two rabbis didn't answer the question. The second one actually made it worse. And here are hundreds of people, including that woman, who are waiting. If I don't come up with somewhat of an answer, a respectful and a Torah-dic answer, they will go away forever, remembering that the rabbis didn't have an answer. And I felt a real achrayus. I felt what the Rebbe always would say, you're responsible. You're talking to people. You make either a Kiddush Hashem or you make a Chil Hashem. The Chil Hashem was done already. So this was up to me. So I'm standing there, and hot under my collar, the lights are shining, everyone's looking at me. And what you do in times like this, and maybe one day you'll have a situation like this, you'll need to know the tricks of the trade. You close your eyes, you pray to Hashem that He should put the right, Adnei Svosei Tiftach, you should put the right words in your mouth, and you invoke your Rabbi. I said to all this was speedily going, speeding through my mind at the time. What would the Rebbe say? What would the Baal Shem Tov say? What would Levi Yitzchak Berditchever say? What would the Moshe Rabbeinu, Ev Yisrael say? And I started, and I said, that Baal HaTanya, V'Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe, once said that when you're asked a question and you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I said, so I'm going to tell a story, and if I need to, I'll have to sing. So I got a laugh. Everybody laughed. It would have been nice I could then exit right there and then and leave them with this nice vort. But obviously that was not enough. I needed to now address the issue. But now I had Schusovis, the Alter Rebbe, standing on his shoulders. I'm going to go for it. So I told the story and I said, then that's the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. The fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rab Shalom Dov Berov Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab, once in Tofreish Mem Ches, Simchas Torah, he said a maimer, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bo Betrunia in B'Yosef. And he spoke about how God cannot demand and will never expect something from people they cannot do. Can't complain, can't ask someone to do something they don't have the koyach. And he spoke at length, the Maila of Anoshim Pshutim. It's a maimer, famous maimer. That's Simchas Torah. The quality, the virtue of a simple Jew who doesn't have Torah, doesn't have Aveda, doesn't have Milchs Chasadim necessarily. Simple, Tmimus Dika, simple Jew. Pashat Eid. And the Alter Rebbe Rashab lauded the qualities of a Pashat Eid, quoting the Baal Shem Tov, that a Pshitus of a Ish Pashat touches Pshitus Ha'atzmus. Many stories we know, the Baal Shem Tov's Teres on Pshitus, the simplicity of a Eid, of a Munah Pshutim. After the Simchas Torah, Rab Moshe Menz's son, he was one of the big Chassidim of the Rebbe Rashab. He was a big Avid, a big Maskil, a big Yiras Shamayim. came into the Rebbe Rashab and he said, Ad kedei kach, to that extent, the Rebbe Rashab, the way he spoke about the Noshim Pshutim, he of course asked permission. Can I ask the Rebbe a question? Ad kedei kach, dismiss ki'ilu all the milas of Aveda and Teira and Giluyim and all the qualities of that so many Jews work hard at. So the Rebbe Rashab, now this was the story I was telling them, and I elaborated. I decided I'm going for it. Since the other two rabbis did not say anything, I felt I have all the time to do whatever I have to do. And I said, so the Alter Rebbe Rashab said to Rabbi Moshe, he said to him, you're a diamond dealer, right? He says, yeah. I want you to bring several stones to me of different value, and I want you to bring them. Rabbi Moshe didn't know why. Rebbe Rashab said, so fine. He brought several diamonds, different sizes, different quality. And the Rebbe Rashab said, I'm going to pick the one that's most precious, the most expensive stone. And he chose the largest one. Rabbi Moshe, is that the most? He said, he didn't want to contradict the Rebbe. So he was quiet. The Rebbe said, I'm asking you, is this the most precious one? He said, no. But it looks so beautiful. He said, Rebbe, you have to have a trained eye. I don't know if he said the 4 C's, carrot, color, cut, etc., clarity. But he said, you need to have a trained eye. It's not what you see with the Einei Basar, what you see externals. So Rebbe Rashab said to him, if that's the case with mere stones, inanimate, daimon, a stone, how much more so with living neshamas? Neshamas, the Eibishter's neshamas. You think it's what you see with your eye? You need to have a trained eye. So you're talking to me, who's a ish posh, what kind of neshama this one has, that one has? He basically made it clear to him that, what are you asking me a question about neshamas? You're an expert. So I told the story. Then I said the next thing I said. We don't know, and I quoted the Tanya, Perek Lamed Beis, we don't know Gdulasanu, my loss, Miyadeh Gdulasanu. We know which neshamas. I looked around the room. I said, does anyone know which is the greatest soul sitting in this auditorium here? I would have said, I didn't say it, besides these two rabbis, but I didn't say that. I said, do we know the greatest soul? How do we know? Only God knows these mysteries. He didn't tell us. It's not even our job. No one asked us to go measure souls. How do we know what nisyanis a person has? And why in God's mysterious ways you have a child that's born into a beautiful home, healthy parents, they give the child a good education, a good Torah education. All the opportunities are open for that child. And then there's another neshama that's thrown into a family, Rahman al-Islam, a broken family, a suffering family, a divorced family, whatever. Hurt, abuse, no education, no Jewish education. Who decided this exactly? Why did this neshama end up in this house and this one in this house? These are God's mysterious ways. It's not in our domain. So we can't talk about which souls are where and what. It could very well be that the most assimilated Jew who doesn't even know what Shabbos or Yom Kippur is may have the greatest soul. That's why he was put in a place like that, because he has the ability to deal with it. A neshama that doesn't have such strength would never be given such a test. And then I said, finally, the same Alter Rebbe also said, when it says in the verse, Moses was the most humblest man that ever walked on earth. Says the Alter Rebbe, what was he so humble? And there's a famous Maimer in Tovkuf Samach Beis that Alter Rebbe says, because Moshe was shown ad Yama Achrin, ad Yema Achrin. He was shown all the generations to come. And when he saw the later generations of Ikvus and the Mashiach, there would be no Giluyim, and we don't have all the Giluyim, time of Beis HaMikdash, time of Tanoim and Amoraim, or Yemei Benayim, the Rishenim, Achrenim. And still there's a Jew trying, and a little Mesiras Nefesh, doesn't have many Giluyim, but still trying to find God. That humbled him. His generation was a Deir. They had all the Giluyim. They came out of Mitzrayim, they were the highest generation, and yet far from perfect. That Moshe wasn't spoiled because they had all the Giluyim. But a generation has no Giluyim, and they're still fighting to Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit. That's why he was so humble. And then I concluded and I said, so I was taught by my Rebbe and by my Rabbeim that if Mashiach comes tonight, the people with the greatest challenges will march first. And by tomorrow morning, every Jew, assimilated, affiliated, unaffiliated, will know that the best way to actualize yourself as a Jew and as a human being is through Torah and mitzvahs. That's what I was taught. I have to tell you the reaction. The reaction was very powerful. People stood up and gave me a standing ovation. I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I just need to tell you because I was very proud, to be honest. Not mitzad ego. Because I didn't come up with a cute answer. Where did I get my answer from? But sitting for years and learning from the Rebbe and Chassidus, what a Jew is, what a neshama is. The Rebbe stood hours and hours by dollars. Did it make a difference whether someone came, was anyone standing by the door saying, are you educated or did you go to yeshiva, your Shem Shabbos? No, it's neshamas coming to see the Rebbe. Obviously, we do everything to educate and inspire, but we know neshamas. By Fabrengen was someone where the people were the biggest Talmidei Chacham and the most pious, and Yerushalayim sat near the Rebbe. No, we all pushed together, made no difference. So when you're educated with that, not just educated, it's in our bones, it's in our kishkes. That's where I got the answer. I didn't come up with a nice, cute answer on the spot. So I was proud for Chassidus. And I saw the contrast. The two other, I don't want to call them rabbis even. That's why I don't call myself a rabbi, because they're rabbis. I'm not a rabbi. I'm a poshtid. You know? I'd rather have the etzem than all these giluyim, if they're not even giluyim. And they were so humiliated, I can't tell you. And it was the only time I was happy that they were humiliated, because they deserved to be. And after that, I've used this story so many times. Why? Because I always demonstrate with this. I said, so why? What? Ask your rabbi. I tell people everywhere I go, I said, ask your rabbi this question. If Mashiach comes tonight, what will happen to the unaffiliated Jews? And you'll right away know everything you need about your rabbi, for good or for bad. Let me tell you the end. The woman who asked the question came over to me after it ended. And she said to me these words with tears in her eyes. These were her words. She said, you don't know what you did for me tonight. And that was it. She left. I didn't obviously pry. It's her private, whatever she was going through. I never met her again. And I tell the story because I remember it so vividly. And I remember above all, this is a classic example of what the chiddush of Chassidus is. It's not just the teichen, how you talk about it, but the etzem havona. Because this is perfect. You'll say, we educate our children to keep Shabbos, to eat kosher, to do mitzvahs. Now, let's say you have neighbors across the street that don't do that. So what do you tell your children? They're evil? They're inferior? We're the superior ones? That's not what Chassidus says to say. But most Frum Jews, and I've had this question, Frum Jews said, so what do you tell them? I want my children to keep Shabbos. If someone across the street is not keeping Shabbos and they're equal to us, why would my children want to keep Shabbos? Why can't they go play with their friends? Why do they have to, all these different responsibilities? So I have to either say it directly or hint to them, we're better. So what's our answer as a chassid? No, that doesn't make you better. It means you're putting the effort to connect to Hashem. But the neshama, they have neshamas too. And our job is to inspire them. Maybe the Tinnik Shenishban doesn't even know what Shabbos is. We can't judge them. So that thin line, it sounds like a thin line, is a very big difference. We're not suggesting that a person who keeps more mitzvahs is superior to another. That's not how we speak. Then the Alter Rebbe wouldn't say, we say that Torah and mitzvahs, so to speak, is megala your neshama. Neshama, a person in prison also has a neshama. But unfortunately, they did a crime. The neshama, they also say in davening, you think someone who's a criminal is not supposed to say neshama shenasata b'tahiri? I was once talking to a Rav from Meir Shorim. He needed something from me, so we would have a conversation. And he was shitting pech and shvebel against the chilonim, the secular. So I said, I have a question to you. A halacha dika shaila. He's a pesach also. I said to him, if a secular Jew comes to you, a chiloni, and says, I want to start davening tomorrow morning, would you tell him, is he supposed to say neshama shenasata b'taherihi or not? So he looks at me, he says, tells me, you're so wise, what's it called? Smart aleck. I said, tell me, I'm asking you shal halacha. He says, of course he's supposed to say it. So I said, a sheker? He's saying a sheker or he's saying emes? And he never thought about it. How do you like that? Because he wasn't trained to think like that, even though he's a Talmid Chacham. I said, it's an emes, because his neshama is teheri. The neshama comes, ata barasa, ata yitzata, ata nefachtabi, ata meshamer b'kirbi. So the neshama goes into Golas. That's what it says in the Svarim. The neshama yorda lamata. It's in Golas, b'shivya, in a guf and nefesh habamis. I told him that. That doesn't mean it's not teheri. Who created b'tzelem elakim? You can't erase the tzelem elakim. You can conceal it. So Torah and mitzvahs is megalit. You could say if the neshama is neir Hashem nishmas adam, Torah and mitzvahs is neir mitzvah v'teireh that fans the flames like a pilot flame. And the etzem neshama is always intact. Afal pishachat yisrael, and you fan the flame through Torah and mitzvahs. You don't create a new soul through Torah and mitzvahs. So the fact that there are people, that don't know what Shabbos is or kosher or other mitzvahs, it means the Teheret is there, but it's covered up. All the different stories, it's covered up. You have to be megalit. That's not a small thing. Obviously, that's a major thing. But it's a different way of speaking. So essentially, in one word, Chassidus teaches us what a neshama is. If you don't know Chassidus, you look at Jews more like, oh, you belong to the club of Orthodox or not? Do you belong to the club of those that go to this shul or that shul? We don't speak that way. Because we don't judge people by actions. We judge people by there's a neshama there. And we don't put people in categories because you don't know. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, how do we know what challenges they're going through? So we don't go that area. That doesn't mean we don't expect high standards. And that changes everything. How you talk to your children, how you talk to anybody. Your child comes home from school and did something really bad. They hit another child. They were bullying another. Everyone, kula alma, something wrong was done. So how does a Chassidic parent deal with it as opposed to a non-Chassidic parent or any parent? So there's really two approaches that you see out there. Some parents, my child never does wrong. It's always someone else's fault. The teacher, the other child, the school, the system. You blame everybody. The other parents. That's some people. And therefore, they basically tell the child, you're my dear child, it's not your problem, it's their problem. When it's really wrong, the child did something wrong. We're not talking about it's a suffix and we have to make a bir. I'm giving an example of a real problem. The other extreme of parenting is the other extreme, disciplinarian. You did such a thing, you're grounded, you're punished, you don't let the child go play, whatever it is. And you demoralize the child, you break the child. Demoralizing a child is a big aveda. Alter Rebbe says demoralizing, breaking shviras haruach of a person comes from the Yetzer Hara. The parents maybe have anger in them or they don't know how to deal with it, so they just become pure gvura. The first approach is denial. It's like a chesed b'chlal without cheshbon, spoiling a child. The second approach is pure gvura, and the child becomes broken, and you do it again and again. After a while, the child feels like a shmata. That's never an eitzah. You never make someone feel like a shmata, even when they did something wrong. So what's the third approach? What approach is left? The Chassidic approach is, when I say Chassidic, I mean al-pi Chassidus. Your child is always your child. You love your child. Because you love your child so deeply, you make sure that you tell your child, I love you with all my heart. And precisely because I love you so much, and I expect from you, something was done here that wasn't right. So we need to talk about it. We need to do something. There has to be some consequence. Not because you're a bad person, but because you did a bad thing. And because I love you. If I didn't love you, I wouldn't care. You have the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. The only time the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab touched the Frierdiker Rebbe, something happened with a tailor. The ganze Meise wasn't the biggest thing, but it was still something. The Rebbe Rashab came, touched the Frierdiker Rebbe on his cheek. It was kavyochel a slap. It wasn't a slap, it was a touch. But Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his Shimmis, the real thing that impacted me was afterwards I saw my father crying in a corner. He was crying. And that I realized, my father's crying. It means that he had to touch me to teach me a lesson. He's crying. He's not happy. That taught me, made me realize and think about what I did. Because he saw the love. He saw the love. It was gvura shebechesed. This has such long-term and far-reaching implications in every area. I remember once by Fabrengen, I was then in Lubavitch Yeshiva, Bedford and Dean, then we moved to Ocean Parkway. in Chav Tes, in Lamed rather, in Tavshin Lamed. And I remember by Fabrengen, because I remember Rabbi Tenenbaum was our principal, all of us Sholem. And he used to stand right behind Rabbi Mentlik to the right of the Rebbe. And I remember looking at him, because when the Rebbe said, he says, so what's Chassidic chinuch? He says, children will fight sometimes, and they'll do some things that are not always. What's the eitzah? The Rebbe said, Chas v'sholem is a ufei mahant. It's not no longer the derech anymore. It says, you don't do anything. Cheshach shiftei seina b'nei, the Rebbe said, is not chal in Gashmis today. So what do? The Rebbe says, Sedar konchik. There's like a stick, a rod on the wall, but it always hangs on the wall. You never use it. You show the konchik, you never use it. In other words, you have to demonstrate this discipline, but you never use it. And I remember looking at Rabbi Tenenbaum because I frankly, thank God, I didn't get too much pets from any of my teachers, but there were people that did. And I remember after that, he stopped any teacher from saying, you don't. The Rebbe said, Claude, you have to find other ways. There's the diburim. There's other ways. Now, the point I'm making here is that the Chassidus teaches us that even when you deal with Gvura, it's also coming from Chesed. And unfortunately, when people don't know what a neshama is, you don't have that attitude. I remember hearing from, it was by Fabrengen. It was, Tzvi Grimwald was Fabrengen. He told a story. He said that he heard from Rav Nachman Sudak, all of Shalom as well, that remember Robert Maxwell was a Jew, a big businessman in London, England. A very wealthy man. And then they found out stuff he was doing was illegal. And then he disappeared. Some say he jumped off his yacht. They never found him. But you can imagine all the headlines, especially the anti-Semites, had a heyday. Another Jewish ganef, so to speak. So there was a line then that someone had written that says in the Gemara that Reiv Gamvi Yisrael Hen. That's what it says about Eretz Yisrael, that the majority of Ganovim are Jews. Now the Pashta Pshat is why, because in Israel live mostly Jews, so the Ganovim are also Jewish. In America, Reiv Ganovim are not Jews because there's a lot of other people that are not Jewish. But they use that Kav Yochel to dismiss him. Reiv Gamvi Yisrael and Reiv of Ganovim are Yisrael, are Jews. That was the expression being used then in different places to Robert Maxwell, the Jew. So they told this to the Rebbe, that that's what's being said. So the Rebbe says, Reiv Gamvi Yisrael him have to type like this, that even if Rubai is Ganef, he's still a Yisrael. That's how the Rebbe types it. Even Rubai Ganef, Reiv Gamvi, that Rubai is Ganef, he's still Yisrael. Like Al Derech the Taitz, they say the Rebbe Taitz in Tzadikim, Philip Peshi Yisrael, the end of Chige, Peshi Yisrael, Philip Peshi Yisrael, Maleim Mitzvahs Kerimin. So the Rebbe, the Pashta teaches that even though they're Peshi Yisrael, but they're filled with mitzvahs. There's other Kreisen, without mentioning name, that teach it fakert, that even when they do mitzvahs, they're still Peshi Yisrael. Kemuven, that's not the Teres Achsidis. So he told then a story, an interesting story, which I found very powerful. In the early years in Eretz Yisrael, after the founding of the state, there was the Mayor Vilner was a Chavra Knesset. He represented the Communist Party. The Communist Party then was basically Stalin. There was a Jewish Communist Party, one man, one vote in the Knesset. His name was Mayor Vilner. Anyway, could imagine he was hated by the Jews because he would always come and represent the Soviet Union, which was anti-Semitic through and through, Mayor Vilner. But he was a Jew. So one day, I think in the early Mitchofs, someone went and stabbed him with a knife. Didn't kill him, but he almost killed him, but he stabbed him with a knife. And it was a big simcha by Jews. So one of the journalists in Israel wrote an article. He wrote, the guy that stabbed Meir Vilner made two mistakes. He should have stuck the knife deeper and he should have turned it. That was how they hated him. Anyway, this guy ends up Tishrei by the Rebbe. This journalist, I don't know what his name was. I think Chavhei, Chavav, something like that, if I recall correctly. He goes by Erev Rosh Hashanah, I believe. Oh, no, Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur for Lekach. The Rebbe gives him a Lekach. And the Rebbe says to him, Nicht azeh schreibt man auf Aiden. That's not what you write about a Jew. Even though it was Meir Vilna, the Rebbe said, Nicht azeh schreibt man wegen Aiden. I should have stuck the knife in and turned it. And then the Rebbe said to him these words, Und was Aid is, wird man reden Sukkos. That's what the Rebbe said. So he went right into the Rabbi Hadrocho, and he said that the Rebbe told him, Reden Sukkos, he wants to make an appointment to see the Rebbe in Sukkos. Chalamoid, whenever. Rabbi Hadrocho said, there's no Yechidus till after Tishrei. After Tishrei Gesund Reid. He said, the Rebbe told me Sukkos. He says, there's no Yechidus. So he says, can you check? So he checked with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him that there's no Yechidus in Sukkos. He says, maybe the Rebbe with Reiden could be by Fabrengen. So come stay Sukkos here in Crown Heights. And the Rebbe will Fabrengen several times. The Rebbe Fabrengen then during Sukkos, second day of Sukkos, Shabbos, Chalamoid Sukkos, middle of Simchas Be'Sheva for the Bochim. So he comes to the Sukkah, one of the Fabrengens, I think the second day of Sukkos, and the Rebbe is sitting. And when he walks into the Sukkah, the Rebbe was sitting in a place he could see anyone. The Sukkah wasn't packed. You could see people who walked, and the Rebbe saw him. And suddenly the Rebbe says, "Vos is Aid?" The Rebbe said, "Mitreid vos Aid is." Vos is Aid? Zog the Gemara Chagiga. That film of Peish Yisrael Malay mitzvahs karimin. That even someone that's a Peish Yisrael is filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. And the Rebbe said, "Why rimen? What's up with mitara rimen?" You could say Malaym. There's other plants and other fruits that have seeds. So he says, by rimen, the Rebbe said, the seeds are separated by these thin membranes. And if you open up a rimen, you see the seeds are not just in there. There's these thin white membranes, like skin. So that means that the mitzvahs, like the seeds, are not one with the fruit. There is a hefsek. So that's why the Gemara uses the moshel of a rimen. But there's still Malay mitzvahs, except it's not nesachdus with them. Other fruits, the seeds are connected to the fruit, etc. This is what I heard. So bring it back to what I was describing. You know all this because you learned, you know what Avis Yisrael is, but still you need Asius. Because whoever you're going to speak to, you have to realize that we have a schus, a humble schus, to speak to another Jew. And it doesn't matter what it looks like in the Giluyim of that Jew. You do not know what's going on. It's very easy to be judgmental. Even in Chabad, we have, unfortunately, some judgmentalism from time to time. And it's critical to cut all that out. It's a schus to talk to a neshama. We don't know what that person went through. And we don't know what the challenges they have and why they able to send them to this world. That is an approach that you're not going to find in mainstream Jewish education. Because without neshama, you can't think that way. Without neshama, Yiddishkeit comes down to how many mitzvahs did you do today? But that's not enough to measure. Why? Because it becomes easy to us. We grew up with it. Anyone that grew up from a home, a Chassidic home, it's natural to us to do mitzvahs. It's like almost our habit. That everyone said, it says in the Yerushalmi, the person who came into shul, it says, when they said, Moedim, menafshe kara, he automatically bowed. So everyone sees it as a mila, right? You're so trained that we say, Moedim, you don't even have to think. You automatically bow your head. And the Rebbe said that that's the hepech of Aveda. It's good. It's a nice compliment. Someone does it menafshe. But the Alter Rebbe makes in Tanya that if it comes on Aveda, then it's lo yavodeh. It's your habit. Me'epomim, to learn the Gemara, Elamit Pirkei, Me'epomim, the Alter Rebbe says from Menachos, in the Gemara, it's called lo yavodeh. Why? 100 times to learn a piece of Gemara, a piece of Mishnah? But it's your habit. The Me'epomim va'achas, that achas, because you went out of your comfort zone. So I can elaborate and go on about the Yesod just from this alone in how to educate, how to speak to another Jew, even your own friends and community. To our children, one day you'll have children, Mitzvah Hashem. And obviously to Jews out there, who knows where they're coming from. And it's critical to really internalize this because when you do, your whole way of speaking is different. And this is not compromising the integrity of Torah. It's not like saying, oh, you know what, we're going to be makel because the person's a tinik shenishba. That's not what I'm saying. Adarabah, because you love them, you want to teach them everything. But you can't begin with judgment because we don't know. We don't know what a person and why the Eibishter made it this way. So using this point, I want to talk about a few other points in what I would call what makes a chinuch different in Chassidic chinuch. When I say chinuch, I don't just mean in schools for children. I mean even chinuch of adults, even as we communicate with each other. So I broke it into 5 points, which I'll just share with you. 5 ways, I called it 5, how Chassidus revolutionizes education. Number 1, that it's empowerment versus information, methodology versus facts, and character development versus data. So the Rebbe would say very often like this, that you could teach someone information. Facts, halachas, history. They could be abuking the whole Chumash and the whole Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, but they don't know how to think. How does a Torah person think? Methodology is a very different thing. The Rebbe brings v'himidu talmidim harbe. Why say v'himidu? What kind of statement is it? It should be v'chinchu talmidim harbe or yilmudu talmidim harbe. What's v'himidu? Because the goal is to make the student stand on his own feet. You can teach a student or a child or any makabel. Here's a question, here's the answer. What'd you achieve? You showed him an answer to a question, but you didn't teach him how to answer a question. So let's say another question will come to him and his teacher is not there. What's he going to do? He didn't learn the method. What you want to do is teach him a methodology, an approach. So no matter what question comes your way, this is the approach you take. It's a major difference. Shalhevas elim elel, the Rebbe often quotes from Behaleska, the Rashi. You don't just want to light the flame, you want it to stand on its own feet. Elim elel. Look at this. It's now 26 years from Gimel Tammuz. You have thousands of shulchim, tens and tens of thousands of talmidim and talmidis that were nischanach by the Rebbe, and some born even after Gimel Tammuz. And yet they learn the sichos and they learn the mamorim. What the Rebbe is not here begashmis to direct and guide. The ruchnis, behind the scenes, kiposhit. But b'peil mamish, so how is people, everyone wonders, how can a movement continue on? Because the Rebbe taught a method. Shluchim did not have to run to the Rebbe every 5 minutes and ask, what am I supposed to answer? Obviously, we asked the Rebbe when we had to and if there was opportunity. But the Rebbe taught a methodology, that methodology called Chassidic methodology, which really originates from the Alter Rebbe. Every Rebbe in each generation added to it, but it's a method. It's more than facts. And you could see immediately, a teacher that teaches many facts, the student is not empowered. He may be full of knowledge, like the people have a lot of book knowledge, but they have no common sense. That doesn't mean you know how to answer a question. A methodology is very different. Like they say is, I'm not going to give you fish. I'm going to teach you how to fish. I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm not going to just tell you what to do. So that's number 1 in the derech of a chinuch. Number 2, Chassidus teaches us that Torah is filled with many details. You start a Chumash, you start reading Bereshit, Baruch Elokim Shema V'Sa'oretz, right? And then it talks about V'eretz Chesach Chesach V'Teyu V'Voyu V'Chesh Chapnei Atehem. Then you go on and on. If someone doesn't have directions, a lot of details. That's Torah Shebiksav. Wait till you get to Torah Shebal Peh. Details upon details upon details. Where's the bigger picture? What Chassidus offers is not just the details of Torah mitzvahs, but the bigger picture. What's the bigger picture? What's the sum total and the whole vision of what the Eibishter wants with Torah? And you're not going to find that right in a pasuk necessarily. So Chassidus takes the right psukim and says, what's the ikar shebi ikar? What's a prat and what's a klal? You can talk to many people and who are lemdei Torah in yeshiva, and you ask them one question: Why was the world created? And many will answer: in order for us to do mitzvahs, so we can build a big retirement package when we go to Elam Haba. The whole world is a pruzdur, a corridor to take us to get a big reward. This is a common response that you'll get in the mainstream Jewish Fruma community. You ask any child in a Chabad child, they may not be a lamda nagon, but they'll say right away, that's not a small difference. You can know all the Yiddishkeit and not know what the purpose of it all is. Even Torah mitzvahs is what? Is to be mizvarer and mizachich this world. Now you'll say, is this a chiddush of Chassidus? No, it says in the pasuk. However, Chassidus emphasizes and focuses what the ikar is. and so on and so forth. So the big picture always informs the small picture. It's a very different way of teaching. I mean, I'm not going to criticize my own education. Even in our own systems, Lav Dafka, we always heard what the big picture. And sometimes you start wondering, you learn all these different details and hair splitting in Gemara, and you ask the question, why are we learning all of this? What do we need to know every pitchivka? The answer is because this is all part of a big picture. God wants us to transform this world, turn it into a dira b'tachtenim, and the lashon of Basel Legani that we're learning, Yud Shvat coming up, that's Ikashkini b'tachtesim, Legani, Legnuni, that this should become a gan, where Lakus is begole, and so on. So that's the second point in the education approach. The third is how you deal with a problem. In medicine, there's an expression, are you dealing with the symptoms or are you dealing with the root of the problem? Symptomatic medicine means you have a headache, here's a painkiller. Here's a Tylenol, an Advil. You have a cut on your finger, God forbid, here's a Band-Aid. So that may be good for short-term and superficial issues. But then there's a sheidish hadvarim. Sometimes you solve a problem, you put a Band-Aid on it, but you didn't solve the problem because the root is not resolved. Chassidus teaches us to look at the sheidish. Once we look at all of Chassidus, what is it teaching you? That everything has a sheidish l'mayla. Something eish lamata is mushrish in gvura of asiya and yitzira and bria tatzilus, and mayim is rooted in again chesed all the way up. Then that where's chesed rooted in the erein sof legalis gili gvura is rooted in the tzimtzum and the ability to lay legalis. Everything has a root. Now that is a fundamental different way of looking at things. When someone comes to you and says, and I deal with this literally, unfortunately, on a daily basis, people tell me their problems, shalom bias issue. So what's the problem? You hear my husband, he squeezes the toothpaste from the middle of the tube. He can't squeeze from the bottom. And it makes me crazy. So I said, that's the problem? Obviously, the problem is never what people say. It's always something more. You try to get to the root. Now, sometimes people don't even know themselves what the root of the problem is. They're talking to you about the symptoms. You know, what is the root? The root is getting to the sheidish hadvarim and knowing how to look at something, not the chitzenius, but where it all is rooted. And that leads us to what the Rebbe speaks a lot about, milchama. There's milchama, a defensive war, and there's an offensive war. Milchama is tenufa, and milchama is hagana. So defense means there's a problem, let's find a way to solve it. Mechemes tenufa means no, we preempt it, behave the right way, and automatically you won't have this issue. That's connected to solving problems at the root. Number 4 is the relevance of Torah and mitzvahs. I mentioned this a number of times, I believe, maybe here, I don't remember if I ever mentioned it here. The most repeated statement from the Rebbe of all sikhs is Torah Meloshen Hira. How many times did the Rebbe say that? Sometimes 10 times in one Fabrenga, maybe more even. Hira. The Alter Rebbe's whole Tanya is miyused on what? Ala posuk ki korev elecha dover me'ed befichol b'vovcha la'asese eich shu korev me'ed. Eich. What's korev? So I think I mentioned to you that I actually asked the Rebbe if you can translate korev as relevant. Because korev doesn't just mean close. I mean, you can stand close to an Oren Kedesh, doesn't mean that the Tate is korev to you. It just means you're physically close. So relevant. Relevant means everything. You learn a story in the Pashas Va'era this week that seems like happened thousands of years ago. What's negated to me today? Marcus Cheshach, Marcus B'chedes, or whatever it may be. The answer is everything has relevance. That's the 4th thing. And again, this isn't just chinuch in a school, it's a chinuch in general. Everything is relevant to our lives. And that again, there are people who learn kol ha'Torah kula, and they sit and learn chumash with every meferish, but they don't know what's the message. What's the takeaway personal message? And finally, maybe the most important of all, the Rebbe's always words were, everything you teach has to be with dvarim hayetzim min halev nechnasim el halev. It's not just information, as I said before. It's empathy. You care. The person who you're teaching or the person you're communicating knows you care. You care about them. You care about the matzav. In today's language, they call it emotional intelligence, not just intellectual intelligence. You care. There's an expression they say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You can get up a guy who gives a speech or a shir or a class, and he's brilliant, agon adir, and yet, it doesn't touch you because you feel, even if he's not a Baal Gaiva, you feel, he's teaching information. Does he care? Does it bother him that, does he care about a person who cares? The Sikh of the Rebbe, I forgot what year it is, early Mems, told the story of the Chofetz Chaim. There was some Gzeira, and a bunch of Jews a delegation went to the government to try to get rid of this Gzeira against Eden. And they argued with them, and they argued. They didn't get anywhere. They came back home. So the Chofetz Chaim said, so what happened? They said, we were not successful. So the Chofetz Chaim, the Rebbe tells the story in the Fabrenga. The Chofetz Chaim said, did anyone faint? And the Rebbe, I remember, said it loud. He yelled out, did anyone care enough to faint? Not that necessarily it would have worked, but did you care enough? You just went to have a debate or try to affect the care. I'll conclude with the story of this last week's Parsha. My father was in Yechidus by the Rebbe. It was a long Yechidus, it was Lamed Aleph, one of the long Yechidus that he had. And my Rebbe, half jokingly, half smiling, the Rebbe said to my father, you're a journalist. He said, maybe you want to interview me. The Rebbe asked my father this three times. Twice in Yechidus, once in another situation. So my father said to the Rebbe, "We can alles fragen? Can I ask anything?" So the Rebbe says, "America, you're stuck in censoria. There's no censorship here. You can say, of course you can ask everything." So my father said to the Rebbe, people want to know that why the Rebbe doesn't get advice from anyone, doesn't make committees, he doesn't collaborate with other Gedei Yisrael or go to their asifas and so on. The Rebbe comes out with something, it's unilateral, that's what he comes out. The question that he didn't ask, some he didn't ask. So the Rebbe, it was Pasha Shmeis. So the Rebbe says to my father, the Pasuk in the Parsha, the Pasuk says that when Moshe saw the Mitzri hitting a Jew, so it says, Moshe saw it, so he looked, Vayifan Moshe Kevukei, he looked here, he turned there, Vayar ki Einish, he saw there's no one, no Einish, and then he went and he killed the Mitzri and buried him in the sand. So the Rebbe said, what's the Vayifan Moshe Kevukei? Mishlok Ta'id, do what you got to do. Why is he looking around? So Rashi says, the Rebbe said, Vos Rashi zokt. He was looking if there'd be any Seitzoyim that would come out of this Mitzri. The Rebbe said, that's nicht pshat mamish. Was he afraid for his own skin? He's looking around if anybody's watching. The Rebbe said, didn't help anyway. Doesn't vavirim b'ditzi, and they went to Masad. And Moshe had to run away to leave Mitzrayim because of that. So what's the pshat? So the Rebbe said, the pshat is azeh. Moshe sees a mishlok ta'id. Vayifa Moshe kevukei, cooked a room, to zense emetza art. Does anyone care? He looks here, he looks there, nobody cares. So he did, so Vayar ki Einish, he says, Shishtak Einish, no one cares. No one, so Moshe did what he had to do. That was the Rebbe's answer to my father. When my father left the Yechidus, so the Bochrim all came to him and said, "Nu, tell us something." So he said, "I'll tell you one thing. The Rebbe said he's Moshe Rabbeinu." That's what that was my father's hergish. But the point being, they're caring. You cannot imagine how much that goes. You ask shluchim. It's not their brilliance. It's not their godless and all these things. It comes down, you care. You cannot know what kind of impact you have when someone knows you call them. Not necessarily you want something from them. They say care. Everyone talks about the Rebbe. They say, when the Rebbe spoke to me, it was completely focused on me. It didn't matter who else was in the room, who else was in the Fabrengen. That means a care. That's a Rei Yisrael. When Moshe Rabbeinu went to find that one sheep, what was the Chiddush? There are thousands of sheep in the flock of Yisrael. One sheep wandered off. First of all, that's something that Moshe knew, that one sheep disappeared. But then he went and looked for it. And he put it on his shoulder and he carried it back. And the Eibishter said, if that's how Moshe treats a sheep, one sheep, I will trust him with my sheep, with my children. That element of care, of love, is the fifth thing that I wanted to bring in. Now, I'm not suggesting, Hadrocho, that the other Meislis Chinuch and other systems don't have any of these elements. First of all, Chassidus has seeped in everywhere. But I wanted to spell out, remember the Alter Rebbe said Chassidus is not a maflega, so this is not our competitive edge, that we're like superior to everybody. It's to appreciate with humility what was given to us. The Chassidus and the Rabbeim gave us a derech, mahalach, not just facts, and not just information. Approach how you talk to someone, and how you educate someone, and how you empower someone, how you love someone, and how you care, and the different points that I discussed here. So I hope you take this to heart, because I'm not saying this lightly. These points can change completely how you approach people. Maybe some things sound obvious to you, but think about it. We all can do better in each of these areas. So with that, we shall conclude. And until next session.
Sure.